There are moments in history so horrifying that simply discovering they happened can be a traumatic experience for generations that never lived through them. Most people hear the words death camp or concentration camp, and their minds travel to Europe. They picture barbed wire, starving prisoners, watchtowers, and the horrors of Nazi Germany during the Second World War. But what if I told you that America has a chapter of history so disturbing that many people have never encountered it in a classroom, never seen it in a documentary, and never heard it mentioned in a history lesson? Not because nothing happened, but because history has a way of remembering some tragedies while quietly leaving others to disappear. This is one of those stories. The foreboding site called the Devil's Punchbowl in Natchez, Mississippi, USA, was a scene of the most unimaginable horrors perpetrated against Black victims in this dark era. This was where about 20,000 freed Black slaves were thrown in to starve, to suffer, and to perish. The ill things done to Black men, women, boys, girls, and children in this concentration camp was so unspeakably evil and grotesque that this very story was systematically erased from the annals of American history. 1863 wasn't a year of singular horrific events, but a year that encapsulated the systemic evil Black Americans faced. It was a year remembered by many Americans as the turning point of the Civil War, a year of speeches, battles, promises, a year when President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation declaring that enslaved people in the rebelling Confederate states were to be free. To millions living in chains, those words sounded like dawn after a very long night. Imagine hearing, perhaps for the first time in your life, that freedom was no longer just a dream whispered in the darkness of slave cabins. Imagine believing that the whip had finally cracked for the last time, that your children would never again be sold, that your wife could no longer be taken from you, that you could finally walk without asking another man for permission. For countless Black Americans, freedom was no longer something to imagine. It was something to run toward. And they did, by the thousands. Entire families abandoned plantations. Men, women, the elderly, mothers carrying babies, children too young to understand why everyone was running. They all followed rumors that Union lines meant safety. Every mile northward or toward Union-controlled territory carried the hope that life was finally about to begin. But the sad truth is, Black freedom was not as simple as a single proclamation from a white slave master. The Civil War was now over, but Lincoln's order did not magically end slavery. It did not provide homes for the newly freed. It did not guarantee food, employment, medical care, or protection. Black Americans felt betrayed yet again to have trusted that the Emancipation Proclamation decreed by Abraham Lincoln was meant to change everything. It was a sham all along. This would compel these heartbroken Black men and women to dust up and embark a mass relocation to where they had thought would be better and peaceful for them, only to meet the cruelest of fates there, mistreatments they never did face even when they were slaves. In this video, we are unmasking to you a sad history which has been so hidden that you most likely have never heard of it, one so dark that it takes you where forgiveness cannot be found. Before we continue, do kindly support our work. Hit the thumb button below, share video with friends and families, and subscribe to stay tuned in. Without further ado, let us dive in. Somewhere in the foothills of Mississippi, the trees grow heavy with abundant uneaten peaches. So nourishing and big these peaches look that one would wonder why the locals do not eat it. Varieties of tales have haunted the Devil's Punchbowl in Mississippi for decades, from pirates to plane crashes. While the land itself may not be full of treasure, it is haunted by the history of mass unalivings, terror, and a past filled with hatred for Black Americans that cannot be ignored. In recent years, the story behind the Devil's Punchbowl grew increasingly sinister when a mass grave was found in the area. As historians looked into the grisly discovery, they learned that the grave held the bodies of thousands of formerly enslaved African Americans. An even more terrifying revelation unearthed by the researchers in Mississippi was that these corpses in question belonged to slaves who were freed during the Civil War and then re-imprisoned in this hollow concentration camp. Now let us take you to the very beginning. The American Civil War played a significant role in the dark history of the Devil's Punchbowl. This war, which broke out on the 12th of April, 1861, was the result of a conflict between two fundamentally different societies, the industrialized, urbanized North and the agricultural, slave-based South. For decades, tensions had been simmering between the two regions over issues like slavery, states' rights, and economic and cultural differences. The North, which had undergone rapid industrialization and urbanization, saw slavery as morally reprehensible and economically inefficient. In contrast, the South's economy, society, and very identity were deeply entrenched in the institution of slavery. The region's agricultural economy, which relied heavily on labor-intensive crops like cotton, tobacco, and sugar, was utterly dependent on the forced labor of enslaved Africans. The South's wealthy planters and farmers saw slavery as essential to their way of life, and their economic survival seemed inextricably linked to the perpetuation of bondage. This entrenched commitment to slavery ultimately contributed to the South's secession from the Union and then the eventual outbreak of the Civil War. The opening salvo of the American Civil War was fired when Confederate forces unexpectedly attacked Union troops garrisoned at Fort Sumter in Charleston Harbor, South Carolina, setting the stage for a brutal and divisive conflict. The Confederacy, led by President Jefferson Davis, had seceded from the Union in the months following Abraham Lincoln's election as president in 1860. The Confederacy saw Lincoln's victory as a threat to their way of life, which relied heavily on slavery. The early years of the American Civil War saw several pivotal battles, with the First Battle of Bull Run standing out as a significant Confederate victory. Fought on July 21, 1861, it was the first major battle of the war, marking the beginning of a brutal and devastating conflict that would span 4 years and claim the lives of hundreds of thousands of Americans. It was so intense that the Union was losing most of its population rapidly. Although the population of the Union was more than the Southern population, this didn't give them an upper hand. The Northern states, also referred to as the Union states, had constituted 22 states, while the Southern states, also called the Confederacy states, were made up of just 11 states. In 1860, the entire population of the United States was 31.4 million. 3.8 million men, approximately 12% of the total population, were enrolled in the military service. 620,000 had died, that is 2% of the total population in the war. Seeing this, President Abraham Lincoln knew that he had to do something. In the same vein, with his astute vision and keen mind, he had come up with the move of acquiring more manpower. Lincoln had figured that the only productive manpower which could have been readily available to salvage the sad end closing in on them were the black slaves on their shores. To this end, he had enticed the entire African American slaves with emancipation in a bid to get them to fight for the Union. This was called the Emancipation Proclamation, a decree set to liberate all slaves immediately.
That on the first day of January, in the year of our Lord 1863, all persons held as slaves within any state or designated part of a state shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free.
Things had worked out as planned by Abraham Lincoln. The Emancipation Proclamation idea had successfully lured the entire black slaves and their troops to the side of the Union. These blacks had fought loyally in a 2-year civil war against the Confederacy and had defeated them for the Union. They had fought for their belief in a brighter future where nothing other than racial and economic equality is the order. But after all said and done, the nation they had fought and won a war for was still unprepared to deal with the question of full citizenship for its newly freed black population. The newly freed slaves were faced with an increasingly dire situation now. Many had neither education nor money, being denied both during their enslavement. They were often forced into sharecropping, renting land from their former owners and giving a portion of their crops as rent. This arrangement kept them in a cycle of grave poverty and dependence. These challenges had become overwhelming and unendurable. Starvation, segregation, beatings, whippings, killings continued on the rise. The Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 loomed large, forcing free blacks to live in constant fear of being recaptured and returned to a life of servitude. In this heat, about 110,000 freed slaves and escapees would be compelled to undertake a massive exodus from the northern part of the country. Many traveled through Natchez, Mississippi, seeking shelter and a new start. By 1870, the population had grown to 9,057, with 3,728 whites and 5,329 blacks. This drastic increase in the black population raised tensions in the city. The residents of Natchez, feeling resentful that the people who were once their property were now free, called upon the Union troops, who were still lingering after the war, to devise a merciless solution. The Devil's Punchbowl. The Devil's Punchbowl is a naturally enclosed area in Natchez City, Mississippi. It got its name from the unique appearance it carries, resembling a bowl-like hollow. This camp, located at the bottom of a cavernous pit with trees on the bluffs above, was seen by the Union troops as the perfect place to harbor their now new captives. According to Don Estes, historian and former director of the Natchez City Cemetery, the Union decided to build an encampment for the freed blacks at the Devil's Punchbowl and walled it off so there'd be no escape for any of them. The Devil's Punchbowl consisted of 3 camps, all used by the troops to imprison these already freed black slaves and put them in conditions far worse than those on the plantations. This was another concentration camp eventually. Men were made to do unthinkably hard labor, while women and children were left behind in the camp and usually deprived of food and water. The harsh weather conditions, arduous work, malnutrition, and poor hygiene would lead to a variety of health problems, fatigue, smallpox, and other insane diseases. Experts estimate that in just 1 year, more than 20,000 freed black people died at the Devil's Punchbowl. The death rate was so incredibly high that these prisoners had begged the troops to let them go back to the plantations, but their pleas fell on deaf ears. Paula Westbrook, historian and paranormal researcher, explained that the Army didn't even let these black people remove the bodies of the deceased from their midst. They just threw down some shovels and told the prisoners to bury the bodies exactly where they died. But these prisoners had already become too tired and enfeebled with incessant suffering, thus were unable at this point to dig reasonably into the ground to properly cover their dead ones. The increasingly decomposed bodies did eventually cause more diseases, and more deaths struck the camp. Regrettably, this story, like so many others, has been drowned beneath a ravine filled with pain and suffering. The United States has proved to have a deep-rooted history of racially motivated mass killings that were frequently denied and went undocumented by authorities. As James Baldwin once stated in 1963, "American history is longer, larger, more varied, and more terrible than anything anyone has ever said about it." James E. Yateman, a bank founder and philanthropist of the Western Sanitary Commission, visited the Devil's Punchbowl in November 1863 and wrote an appeal to President Lincoln regarding the condition of the formerly enslaved black Americans. Yateman had written thus: 75 died in a single day. Some returned to their masters on account of their suffering. Despite the tedious and back-breaking jobs that were assigned to them, they were usually killed on a daily basis. At least a record of 20,000 deaths of men and women were recorded in a year. Without any hint of remorse or sympathy, the Union troops continued to mistreat these black Americans, not giving them any chance to leave the camp, not even to bury the dead. The dead were buried wherever they dropped as commanded by the troops, and they had continued dying. As Westbrook noted, the people who dreamed of building their lives away from the master's whip ended up owned, tortured, and enslaved once again. They never got the chance to build their businesses, amass wealth, and provide a good life for their offspring. They never got to experience true happiness, true freedom. As at today, occasional flooding by the Mississippi River brings out skeletal remains from the mass graves that adorn the former encampment. This proves that there was indeed a plethora of deaths there at some point in time. Not just this, to substantiate the fact that most blacks were killed in the camps, let's take a look at the bluffs in the Devil's Punchbowl. They are known for their massive abundance of wild peach groves, but these peaches remain uneaten by the locals even till date. This is because the locals are conscious of the evil carried out by their progenitors. Even though they tried their best in trying to convert the entire chronicle of events into their favor, they couldn't just ignore this truth. Eating fruits fertilized by the flesh and blood of innocent humans? Nah, that would be way too extreme. In remembering the Devil's Punchbowl, we confront a painful chapter of American history, but we must do so to ensure such atrocities are never repeated. The suffering of those who were imprisoned, starved to death, and forced into labor to the breakdown in this cruel encampment must never be forgotten. Their plight serves as a stark reminder of the horrors of racial oppression and the long struggle for freedom and equality. That brings us to the end of yet another eye-opening video. Just don't forget to like, share, and reach out to us in the comments section to share thoughts. We'll be waiting. Thank you for watching.